How would you describe your childhood?
It was a pretty lonely childhood. And yeah, it was a very anxious childhood. I just remember constantly being afraid that I was going to be screamed at. That kind of blood-curdling scream that goes all the way to the core of you and just rattles your bones. That feeling of dread just kind of then radiates out from your body and you just feel ill. I'd only ever been with one kind of coach, from one country. That is the leading country in the sport. But it's so culturally different, and the way that these coaches would coach was very corrections only. Like, they would only ever give the corrections for what to do. Hearing nothing but corrections only for 5 hours a day, 6 days a week after week, month after month, year after year, just over and over, just nothing but like what you did wrong. It really starts to just feel like criticism. It took me a few years to be like, why don't you ever tell me what was good about it? I finally went to rehab in 2011, I think, when I was 23 years old. And that was after using drugs and alcohol as a not coping mechanism all throughout my teenage years.
When did you discover your sexuality?
I had a sexual experience. I was about 5 or 6 and he was probably 12 or 13. Messages that I was absorbing from society as well, growing up in the 90s. Basically kind of got the idea that gay was not as good as straight, and I knew that I liked boys, and I guess the shaming of that started around that age. I went to my first World Junior Championships at 11, and then started diving not long after that. Mum just used to use the local pool as like a all-day daycare. My local pool just happened to be the Sleeman Aquatic Centre, which is the national training centre for diving. Everybody was kind of doing bomb dives, and I was showing off doing double flips into bomb dives because I was a show pony. And one of the national coaches just happened to be walking out along pool deck and saw me and was like, hey, how do you know how to do that? Do you want to try diving? And so I started diving the next week.
The I Catch Killers podcast was a fresh start for me as I left policing behind and started a new life. Over the years, we've laughed together, cried, and shared some powerful moments. Welcome to I Catch Killers. Welcome to another episode of I Catch Killers. We all carry our own personal demons. Sometimes you look at other people's lives and think because of the success they've achieved, life must be pretty good. But sadly, life can be a bit more complicated, even for Olympic gold medalists like today's guest, Matthew Mitcham. This isn't your typical I Catch Killers episode, but we thought in the spirit of getting in the excitement of the Paris Olympics, we might get an Olympic athlete on. In 2008, Matt stood on the podium at the Beijing Olympics to receive his gold medal for 10-metre platform diving. He was only 20 years old at the time, and he was the first individual, openly gay male athlete ever to win an Olympic gold. What the public didn't realise at the time, Matt had been dealing with his own issues, including drug addiction. Today, Matt has agreed to come on I Catch Killers and talk about the highs and lows of his life. What he has to say will make you feel both sad, but also inspired. Matthew Mitcham, welcome to I Catch Killers.
Thank you.
Is it a bit daunting, the name of the podcast, I Catch Killers, and you're talking to an ex-homicide detective, and I know in the chats that we've had before, you're thinking, how do I fit into this?
Yeah, I'm like, what do you know?
Well, that's what we're going to get to the bottom of. We're going to get confessions out of you, Matt. Look, thanks for coming on. Your life, in prepping for the podcast and following your career, you're a household name at certain times in this country over here in Australia, that you've experienced the highs and lows of life, like most of us do. But in your case, it was probably more difficult because it was such a public thing, and you're only 20 when you won Olympic gold. And, in Australia, as you know, winning Olympic gold, you become a household name. What was it like dealing with that sort of attention at such a young age?
It's one of those weird things. I think I kind of... I think I'd wished it upon myself for a very long time, in that a very powerful driving force throughout my teenage years, like that actually kept me in the sport for, many years longer than what I probably would have otherwise, was the fact that, I was very driven by external motivation, like by external validation, because I've never been able to esteem myself from within. I've never had good self-esteem. Yeah. My idea of my value has always been completely dependent on, like feedback from other people. Like, validation and positive reinforcement from, my mother, who didn't give it freely, or, from validation from other people, or, then I ended up finding a sport where I got feedback about myself in the form of numbers. So if I got an 8, they thought I was good. If I got a 9, they thought I was great. And if I got a 10, they thought I was perfect, which, it was a very powerful motivator for me to try and be better and better in order to feel better about myself just because of my achievements.
Right. It's interesting that your validation of yourself is from external achievements, and I want to dive deeper into that later on in the podcast, because that certainly came out in the interviews that you've done, and the way that you talk about what drove you. I want to ask the question. You're the first Olympic gold medalist we've had on I Catch Killers, so congratulations. We got to bronze with Harry Garside, the boxer. We've had him on the podcast, but we've never got to the gold. So you're the first gold medalist. I want to ask you, I'm trying to get a sense of what drives you. What gives you the sense to believe that you could be the best in the world in your chosen field? Now, I think I'm a fairly driven person. I think, yeah, I can achieve this, I can achieve that. But there's different levels, and I can be the fastest kid at school. I can be this, that. What mindset do you have to think, I'm going to be the best in the world at what I'm doing? What drives you for that?
Unfortunately, I think as a child and as a teenager, the motivation was actually quite negative.
Okay.
Because I grew up in, not the healthiest of environments. I grew up as an only child of a single parent who had, she had me extremely young. She was 18, and she also had undiagnosed Asperger's, like autism, and ADHD. And so she found it extremely difficult to cope with, well, even just, living life on life's terms, like dealing with her own emotions, let alone having this, completely chaotic, unpredictable, thing running around that, I think it stressed her out a lot. And, so her default reaction to everything was kind of, I guess, rage, because she didn't know how to handle her feelings at all. That's just how they came out. And, she has admitted to me in later years that, she kind of, used that fear that I had of her volatility as a way to control me, to make me easier to control. But the impact of that was that I had anxiety, like, from as early as I can remember. And she also used to spend a lot of time in bed, with chronic fatigue, and she would just go absolutely ballistic if I made noise and woke her up. And so, there was a lot of neglect there as well. And I figured out pretty early that when I did something really good, then I got this positive reinforcement and this validation that felt really good. And I felt like that's what I needed. And so then I guess my child mind kind of played that forward and thought, well, if I do something good and I get that positive reinforcement, then if I'm the best in the world at something, then, then mum will love me and everyone will love me, and, I'll feel whole, I'll feel complete. So, right, literally from the age of about, 8, I had this really profound thought, like, I have to be the best in the world at something. Had no idea what it would be. Definitely wasn't going to be sport, because I was, one of those kids that was, always picked last at lunchtime for soccer and cricket and football and all that. Was not good at running carnivals, swimming carnivals, like nothing. I just got really lucky that I ended up finding trampoline and happened to be pretty good at it.
And that led into diving. I suppose breaking it down even further, the psychology, your psychology, I'm getting there what drove you, but the psychology of thinking, were you intimidated by watching other people, what they could do, and think, I can do better? Like I'm trying to understand that mindset, because I think I got a strong mind, but I'd get to a level and just go, I can't compete on that level. So you had something in you that there must, with all the drama on what's motivating you, there must have been some confidence, internal confidence that thought, yeah, I can be the best.
I think I was just kind of blessed with quite a lot of natural ability in terms of the trampolining and then the diving. It was more a case of having to just stick it out, because I saw diving as my ticket to being special, but I hated diving from about the age of 14. Yeah. So I'd already started to slide into a pretty profound period of depression from 14, and so I hated diving, but I saw it as my ticket to being special, so I kept on doing it. But because I wasn't enjoying it, I would get to the pool, I would do everything I needed to do as quickly as possible, but all on autopilot, like without being mentally present, just completely checked out, and letting my body kind of do what it needed to be done, and then leaving. And, by the time I was 18, I was the third best in the country, in Australia, like, not just juniors, but senior as well. So I kind of knew that, the longer I held on, I would eventually be going to an Olympics. It did take, I was good. I wasn't great, but I was good. And that was basically just a bit of natural ability, really, and repetition over time. My biggest issue was the mental side of things in not wanting to be there.
Yeah. And I suppose in a perverse sort of way, that might have helped. It took a little bit of pressure off, because it wasn't something, this golden dream, I want to be this world champion. It was more, I need to be this world champion, and it wasn't. So maybe it was helpful in a perverse sort of way.
Yeah. So it was, of course, like in a way, it was in a perverse kind of way. Yeah, it was helpful in that it just kept me in the sport, for a certain amount of time. I did retire at 18 with no intention of ever returning to the sport, and ended up taking a year off. And in that year, I got a message from a coach in another city, saying, "Look, Matt, if you ever want to start diving again, I'll always have a place in my squad for you." And it was just the way that message was worded, in a really nurturing, like, not pushy way. It kind of demonstrated to me that he cared for my welfare as a human being more than just me as a competing athlete that's going to get them results. And I knew this guy, and I knew that he would be kind of the right person for me. And so I packed up everything in Brisbane, which wasn't that much, because I was 18 and really just,
put your backpack on. Yeah,
basically, and moved to Sydney, and that was 15 months before the Beijing Olympic Games. But the environment that coach created for me, that really inclusive environment, where I knew that I was accepted for exactly who I was, meant that there weren't a lot of the issues of feeling alienated like I had before. That massive geographical had a huge impact on on my mental health, and that training environment actually had a huge impact on my mental health, and that enabled me to be very present in my training sessions for the first time in years. And being present enabled me to be very analytical about my dives, and very technical, and so I basically broke my technique down to scratch, down to basics, and then rebuilt it up to get closer and closer to perfection. And, I was really only able to do all this because, I guess because I was happy in my training environment, and being present, that meant, that I guess the motivation changed from, being very externally focused to actually, I wanted to see how good I could get, like how close to perfect I could get. And so the motivation became an internal motivation. I was now driving, how hard I was working, which then meant that I could push myself further and further into discomfort, where the growth is. And so my progress just shot up like an absolute rocket because, you know, 15 months really isn't a lot of time to prepare for an Olympic Games, especially after, you know, spending a year doing very, very unhealthy things with my body.
Yeah.
So the catalyst for there was, you know, that environment that
Okay.
the coach created.
That makes sense, and I hear a lot, and we've had quite a few sportsmen on the podcast. But I've heard a lot of people talk about people that have been identified as, good coaches, the Wayne Bennett types in rugby league, Johnny Lewis in boxing, and quite often it's about, I don't want to just make them a better player, I want to make them a better human being. And people seem to resonate and respond to that. And it sounds like you found a coach that adopted that same type of mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, he I guess, and maybe it wasn't, you know, this hugely kind of remarkable special thing, but I mean, no, it is like he is a remarkable guy. But I think it was such a huge contrast because I'd only ever been with one kind of coach, you know, from one country that is the leading country in the sport, but it's so culturally different. And the way that these coaches would coach was very corrections only. Like they would only ever give the corrections for what to do. And when you've got this, you're hearing everything through this filter of depression, hearing nothing but corrections only for 5 hours a day, 6 days a week, week after week, month after month, year after year, just over and over, just nothing but like what you did wrong, it really starts to just feel like criticism. And so, you know, here I am just being criticized for years. And, you know, it took me a few years to be like, why don't you ever tell me what was good about it?
Yeah.
And, you know, for them to go, well, if I say nothing, then there was nothing wrong with it. But, you know, you don't, unless you kind of, you know, that is the framework that you're working with. And even still, like it's, you know, particularly for someone with such poor self-esteem, to never, ever get validation was just kind of, it just felt like punishment all the time, nothing but criticism.
Yeah, well, you've explained it well, and I can understand the reason that you'd be thinking that way. I often look at life, and I think about the way I was brought up, and I say this, and I try to correct it with my kids. I went through life competing in things through fear of failure, and that was that was what was driven into me. You don't fail at this. So the way I might play sport will be, you won't get the best out of me until I've got my back to the wall. It's not about the joy of success. I tried to flip that with my kids and just encourage like the success more than the fear of failure. So I suppose it's each individual has a different way of approaching things and what resonates for them. The type of coach that you're talking about, I would imagine in certain cultures that's what's needed. But for you, it sounded like it was the wrong fit, just the criticism of correction, instead of giving you some positive feedback. So I understand where you're coming from.
I actually read a study recently about two groups of, I think it was like math students, like students basically who were doing math competitions or something. And one group of students was praised for their outcome, for their success, and the other group of students was praised for their effort. And what ended up happening over time was that the students who were praised for their effort ended up outperforming, because the students who were praised for their outcome became too like stressed about like having to always like be the best and be successful, that ended up giving them kind of a, I guess in a way like a performance anxiety or you know that perfectionism where you know that fear of criticism. And so you almost don't try things because you are fear of not getting it perfect. It was the students who were praised for the effort who ended up, you know, progressing and outperforming the outcome focused.
That's
students.
Interesting, isn't it? It's very, very interesting, the way to approach things. You mentioned something when we first started speaking, and I've just it's not a direct quote, but it's something in one of the interviews that you've done, one of the many interviews that you've done, and it says a lot about what you've learnt about life. And it also gives me a good insight into the type of person that you are. And you touched on it right from the start. So it sounds like it's consistent in the way that you approach it. This is how I've sort of combined the essence of what you've been saying in your interviews. Your success does not define you as a person or helps you with your own self-esteem. Helping others generates your self-esteem more than focusing on your own achievements. Do you want to explain, if I've quoted you correctly, what you mean by that approach?
I mean, I didn't learn that until I, finally went to rehab in 2011, I think, when I was 23 years old.
Yeah.
And that was after, using drugs and alcohol as a not coping mechanism all throughout my teenage years. Yeah. And then, having a relapse of that after the Beijing Olympics, until I got to a point of absolute desperation, when I finally, went to rehab. And, that's where I learned about, that I had such poor self-esteem, and why I, couldn't handle my feelings, and why I was so entirely dependent on all of these external sources of esteem, in order to just survive, really, because I just couldn't esteem myself from within. And it's like that thing of, what's the difference between what you can control and what you can't control? And, external sources of esteem, you can't control that, because you can't control anything outside of yourself. You can't control other people, other places, other things, try as you might, but you can't guarantee that you can actually control that you will continue to get that consistent source and flow of external esteem. And so, in order to generate it from within, it's like, well, how do you build your own value as a person? How do you feel good about yourself? And to me, the best way, the most effective way I found to do that was to be of service to other people, to help other people, with no expectation of receiving anything in return. Is like that's the creme de la creme. But even, just helping anybody else out in any way is, it makes you feel good about yourself. And so, that's why I do stuff like this and talk about my mental health and, all of this warts and all kind of stuff that, I used to be, and, maybe sometimes occasionally do still feel a little bit of shame every now and then, but I'm able to knock it on the head. But I share my story because, in the hope that it will help other people to relate to it, or, to help to make change, in sport, for example.
Yep.
And I do a lot of work with, with charities, particularly like around drug charities or LGBTQ plus charities. And I also do, I guess most of my work is, within diversity, equity, and inclusion, to try and make the world, corporate spaces, and particularly sports, much more inclusive places, so that, to give everybody the environment for them to thrive.
Yeah. I think when people talk, and people with a profile like yourself that talk openly about, strengths, weaknesses, fears, successes, all that, it has to help, because we all put ourselves in our little bubble and think, people just don't understand. And then you have conversations like we're having now, and you go, oh yeah, I get that. I look at my life and talking back, like I was a homicide detective, and I could be failing in every aspect of my personal life and relationships and things like that. But I got something from helping people when I was a homicide detective. And when I lost that, when that was taken away, I sort of had to look at myself and go, well, are you really a good person, or are you just a good person because people said you were, because you were helping, victims? And I realized that how much I got from that, how much I got from helping others. And it made me feel good about myself, no matter how bad my personal life or other aspects of my life was. Well, I was telling myself, well, I'm a good person because I'm helping other people. So it helped me through stages like that. You touched briefly on your childhood. Where did you grow up? And you're a single child with a single mother, and as you explained, that had certain issues that she was dealing with. How would you describe your childhood when you look back?
I grew up in Brisbane, and it was a pretty lonely childhood. I'm not gonna lie.
Mm.
I I spent a lot of time. It was very I had to be very quiet a lot of the time. Um, so uh any kind of silent thing I could do, I would do. So I was either outside jumping on the trampoline, or I was kind of reading the encyclopedia, because I just loved. I mean, it was escapism
Yeah.
basically, like learning, reading the encyclopedia. But I loved it. I just loved reading, but never fiction, always nonfiction. And yeah, it was a very anxious childhood. I just remember constantly being afraid that I was going to be, screamed at. That kind of blood-curdling scream that just like that goes all the way to the core of you and just rattles your bones,
Yeah.
and then that feeling of dread just kind of then radiates out from your body, and you just feel ill. That was the kind of, that was a pretty common occurrence. But I think, there's something about being screamed at that really just does something to your self-esteem.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, so I don't know. For some reason, I'm particularly affected by words more so than, like, words affect me more than being hit
Yeah.
does,
Interesting.
which is just so weird. But that's just how I'm made. And and when I'm aware of it, I can
Yeah.
try and put in measures to stop that. But yeah, it's for some reason, bones heal, but words, they
Yeah.
really
Well,
stay with you.
yeah. Yeah. No, I understand that, and it's the type of person you are. I can understand how it would affect you deeply. Did you have any role models? Anyone that you looked up to, aspired to, or people that you thought were or are good influences in your life in those early years?
Not really. I think I don't know. I feel like I was just kind of in survival mode, and I was very like kind of, yeah. I was always looking very inwards, very introspective, very reflective. Just yeah, very very trapped up here,
Yeah.
rather than looking to the outside world for for guidance or support or um yeah, anything like that.
Okay, you look back at that, and I think every child deserves, yeah, that safe space and that. So yeah, the thoughts of with you growing up in that environment, it's good if you've got someone that yeah, you can support you and build that confidence. You're also dealing at an early age with coming to terms with your sexuality. Um, when did you discover your sexuality, and when did you yeah, try to suppress it? Because that must have been hard too.
Um, I I had I don't know if it's, I mean, it's okay. I just caught a little shame thing going on. Like I was going to filter myself, but at the end of the day, it's like, I mean, it is what it
Yeah.
is. But I had a sexual experience. I was about 5 or 6,
Yeah.
and he was probably 12 or 13. Um, and that ended up, yeah. So that, I guess that was probably the first sexual experience. And but I guess I kind of knew that I liked boys, um, around then, or and beyond then.
Yeah.
I went to a very religious primary school,
Yeah.
because it was kind of local, and there was kind of the assumption that because it's a private school, you're going to get like a better educational, those religious
Yeah.
schools, because they're sort of semi-private, you're going to get a better education than at a state school.
Yeah.
So I went to a quite a religious primary school that had like a church on the grounds and everything. And there was a lot of religious education. There was like a little altar, little tabernacle kind of thing in every room. And lots of Bible reading throughout the week. And it was, kind of around the 8 or 9 mark where I started, nobody, I don't think anybody ever said it to me explicitly, but, I think through all of that and probably messages that I was absorbing from society as well, growing up in the 90s. I just I basically kind of got the idea that gay was not as good as straight, and I knew that I liked boys, and I guess the shaming of that started around that age, and so I put a rubber band around my wrist because having this shame around how I was feeling. I put a rubber band around my wrist, and every time I had a gay thought, I would kind of snap the rubber band against my wrist as hard as I could to try and like train myself Pavlovian style out of being gay, to try and associate pain with these gay thoughts. I'm hoping that would kind of train me out of it. And so
well, I just want to say on that, Matt, what a horrible way to go through your life, trying to suppress your feelings. Like they're strong. It's to suppress them. You're lying to yourself, and you've taken it to the next level, Pavlov dog style. That inflicting pain when you have a thought about your desires. It must have stuffed you up in the mind. It must have really confused you as a young guy.
Yeah, and there's not only is there kind of this fear, but then there's even more shame put onto it, because it's like, this isn't working. Like I can't, like I'm failing at this. Like so there's far out, man. Yeah, it is pretty upsetting to think about. Like, I did eventually kind of figure out that it wasn't working, and just kind of let it go. And I think I just had to stop thinking about it for a while. Because I don't remember kind of thinking about it anymore for a couple of years. So I think it was just stopping thinking about it, basically.
Suppressing it. Just stop thinking about it, it'll go away. When did you come out and acknowledge? Like, we'll talk about your time when in the media interview before the Olympics, but in your personal life, when did you come out and just acknowledge it and accept, well, that's who I am?
I mean, I guess I was getting more comfortable with it. The thing is, like, probably around sort of 13, 14. Like I had a close girlfriend who knew, and then I guess I started finding a few more friends. But yeah, it was only like people who were kind of very close to me. And but because I'd started diving with the AIS from the age of 11, which is, way too young to, be confident enough in your sexual identity to be telling anybody.
Yeah.
By the time I was kind of comfortable enough to start telling people, I'd already been training with these people for 5 hours a day, 6 days a week for several years.
Yeah.
And so I then consequently felt very stuck in and not being able to really talk to anybody within my training environment and open up to them, because I felt like that would be admitting that I had been lying to them. I'd been deceiving them for years.
I can understand that. It makes it a little bit difficult, doesn't it?
Yeah. So that left me feeling stuck in that training environment for a couple of years, which consequently left me feeling quite alienated. And that really didn't help with, how happy I was within the training environment.
Yeah. With the training environment, when did you start off as doing trampoline, and you reached the high level in that? What talk us through that? How you got into that, and what level you reached, and then how you diverted your interest to diving.
I started trampolining when I was 9.
Yep.
Because I got given a backyard trampoline by my granddad's girlfriend at the time. Just super functional family going generations back. but her son didn't need the trampoline anymore. He'd grown out of it. So I got given the trampoline, and yeah, just absolutely loved it. And so went to trampoline lessons from the age of 9. And yeah, just absolutely loved flipping and being acrobatic and performing. And probably the pretty leotards didn't hurt either. But there was something about
ticking your boxes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There was something about the idea of the aim is to be kind of prettier or better than everybody else. That that kind of resonated me on a very deep level. Because I'd never been competitive at anything before. So I was doing trampoline. I went to my first World Junior Championships at 11, and then and then started diving not long after that, because in the summer holidays, Mum just used to use the local pool as like a
babysitter,
an all day daycare, basically.
Yeah.
Like drop me off at 9 o'clock in the morning, pick me up at 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening. And my local pool just happened to be the Sleeman Aquatic Centre, which is the national training centre for diving.
Okay.
And back in the 90s, they used to have the boards open to the public, for like an hour or two, like every day, before OH&S shut all that down.
I remember those days, and it just seems ridiculous. Go on, jump off the 10 meter. Okay, well, have you ever done it before? No, yeah. Can you? I just can't imagine it these days. But yeah,
I know
it was a different times, wasn't it? Different times.
It was.
Yeah.
So everybody was kind of doing bomb dives, and I was showing off doing double flips into bomb dives because I was a show pony, and one of the national coaches just happened to be walking out along pool deck, and saw me and was like, "Hey, how do you know how to do that? Do you want to try diving?" And so I started diving the next week and was doing both sports for a couple of years. Went to my second World Junior Trampoline Championships at 13, won a gold medal.
Yep.
But I was progressing through diving very, very quickly because I already had all the skills. And trampoline was just a demonstration sport in the Olympics at the time, and so there was not even one guaranteed spot for Australia to compete. And I was a 14-year-old competing against 26, 7-year-olds.
Yeah.
It just wasn't. It was a more logical decision for me to go to diving, which it was much better funded, had a lot more opportunities for international travel and to go to the Olympics, a lot more opportunities to go to the Olympics. Yep. So I ended up making the switch full time to diving at 13, 14.
And you hung on to that for quite a few years, but then you said you fell out of love with diving, and your life went off the track before you decided to straighten out and go for the Olympics. What was that period of life like? What happened there?
I just from about the age of 14, I started to just sink into this depression, which there was no one triggering traumatic event. I think it was just the hormonal goat rodeo of being a teenager, and also quite a lot of genetic predisposition, I'd say, as well. But yeah, so from 14, I was having these very big feelings that I couldn't handle, and I discovered, at some stage in my childhood, I had made a promise to myself that I was never going to act out my anger on another person. Because that's how it had made me feel, and I never wanted to make another person feel that way. Unfortunately, I did have very extreme, like uncontainable anger, but I acted it out on myself with self-harm, and I ended up having to I was self-harming. I was cutting myself, and I ended up having to call my grandma one time to pick me up from where I was and take me to the hospital to get some stitches. And And that's and the worry that I caused in her from that made me realize that that's not an acceptable way, that's not an appropriate way for me to deal with my feelings. But rather than actually find an appropriate way to deal with my feelings,
Yeah.
I was just like binge drinking on the weekends because it had this wonderful effect of making me throw up and pass out, which was kind of like a mental break from me. It was a break from my head and a break from my feelings. And so I was literally just sculling, like blocking my nose and sculling pure spirits like every weekend. And then that, progressed to, weed and LSD and other drugs. And by the time I was 18, it just wasn't enough for me. Like, diving was good in that I guess it probably did provide some sort of like control, like it controlled it in a way, because I wasn't sometimes I was, but I was seldom drinking during the week, because I had to keep on showing up for diving. So in some ways, diving was really good at that. But then, by the time I was 18, that ticket to being special was not enough to outweigh how much I was hating it.
It sounds like self-loathing, and you weren't drinking for the fun of it. Hey, we're going to get wild and enjoy ourselves. You were drinking to mask the pain, literally knock yourself out. And
yeah, it was escapism for sure.
Yeah. And I would imagine after you come down from that, and also when you've gone down the path of the drugs, that you'd wake up feeling worse about yourself. It'd just be spiraling.
Yeah. Particularly once I turned 18, it was all like, it was the party drugs as well. Like, it was the stimulants. It had never been the stimulants before. But when I turned 18, it was everything. And the stimulants had more of that effect of like making me feel worse afterwards.
Well, you come down from your high and
then exactly. So then, then that kind of reinforces the cycle of like, feeling even worse. So, I know what's going to make me feel better. So you pick me up again, and then, temporarily you do feel better, and then you feel worse again. And, and that's, so horrible. That feeling is so horrible that okay, I know how to fix this very quickly. And so that's how it perpetuates and reinforces the cycle.
Yeah. So Matt, for that, like, I hear a lot of people have come on I Catch Killers, and they've been at that point in their life, and then their life goes left, and it means 20 years in jail or all sorts of things. They hit some lows. How did you at that age turn it round to say, okay, I'm going to clean up my act and I'm going to the Olympics? What was there one thing that pointed you back in the direction, or how did you turn your life from the obvious direction it was heading at that stage to the success that you achieved at the Olympics, and the dedication and the focus?
It was literally that text message from that coach, saying, look, if you ever want to start diving again, I'll always have a place in my squad for you. And, I knew that it would be different to how it had always been, like to what I was used to, in terms of, the dynamic within a training environment, the dynamic between myself and a coach. And, I felt it was a shame to quit and to never actually go to an Olympic Games.
Yeah.
So I knew that this was my best chance. And it being only 15 months from Beijing, I didn't want anything to jeopardize my chance of making it to that Olympics. So I went cold turkey off absolutely everything. Drugs, alcohol, junk food, like, everything. I didn't want anything to jeopardize my chance. And, it was a lot of like catching trains, because I couldn't afford, to pay car insurance.
Yeah.
But it was also a lot of like, checking the tracks of the seats of the car seats for, shrapnel that's fallen down there, and looking under couch cushions for train fares.
Okay.
But But I was catching trains a lot, and I was living in Sydney, so at Lidcombe Station, there's the bit that's kind of separate from the rest of the platforms that goes over to Olympic Park, and there's this graffiti there that says, or there was, I don't know if they've painted over it yet, but it says like, Ice Age, like the movie in that type of font, but then it says underneath like the crackdown, and then there's like a crack pipe and a syringe there, and so obviously it's a reference to crack or meth, and it took me 6 months for me because I'd already suspected. I already knew that I was an addict at that stage. I probably wouldn't have used that terminology, but I already knew that I was struggling with addiction.
Okay, so just hold that point there for a sec. Like when you get to that point when you realise you're an addict, like we've all had addictions to certain things, and you can delude yourself and go, I could give up that any time I wanted to, but then you realise that you're making that excuse time and time again. You came to terms with the fact that you're, and you hate to say it, I'm a drug addict.
I would never have said it.
Yeah,
I would never have said it then. But I knew that I was struggling with addiction. I had been to a GP, and said, like I'm struggling with, with meth use and not being able to stop using crystal meth. But he didn't really provide me any solutions, and so I just kept on partying. But like knowing that I was really struggling to stop. But then when I got this opportunity, that was enough of an impetus for me to be like, cold turkey off everything. But it took me 6 months of like, and I had to stop listening to dance music. Like it was all, I just got super into acoustic music, folk music. Then catching the train to Olympic Park every day and going past this, this graffiti, it took me 6 months to stop thinking about meth every single day. But luckily I had such a powerful goal that was, pushing me in a certain direction that I managed to stay completely cold turkey, clean and sober for that whole time.
Well, full credit to you, because I know I've spoken to people that get that high from the meth, and it's just once they've had the taste of it, they fight it for the rest of their lives. It sounds like you broke away from the lifestyle, like the dance music. I'm sure you had to break away from a circle of friends and just focus on what you were doing. So what sort of commitment? We got the Paris Olympics. What type of dedication and commitment do you have to get to the elite level of your sport, just to get to the Olympics? We'll talk about winning the gold medal later, but just to make it to the Australian team. Is it all consuming? Do you have to that has to be your only focus?
I think to win it does. I think maybe not necessarily like just to make it. I think some sports are more competitive than others. And a lot of athletes, a lot of athletes have to work, whilst doing their sport, or they won't be able to support themselves because, so many athletes don't get funding to be able to support yourself. And I didn't. I had to work. Luckily, there was a woman who, like a dive mum, basically, who had her own company. And so I worked as an admin assistant for the 5 hours in between training sessions. So I worked 5 hours a day, 5 days a week as an admin assistant.
Yeah, and that's paid it through. What about the physical thing? And I've got to ask, and I always wanted to ask divers this. You guys and girls look like the most fittest athletes. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm only seeing them dive off. What other exercise and training do you have to do other than walking up the platforms, climbing the ladder or the stairs all the time? But why is it such like I'm looking at it and you look like extreme fit athletes in diving? It's just the nature of the sport. What is the physical training you have to achieve to get to that level?
You have to be super strong to deal with the G forces that you're putting your body through. Like as you're kind of not only falling at like 60 kilometers an hour, but you're also rotating so fast that, if you have a look at a photo of a diver kind of mid-flight,
Yeah.
you'll see like, their skin kind of trailing behind their skull. So you have to be strong enough to actually hold those positions. And so, there'll be every diver will do 2 sessions a day, so between 10 and 11 sessions a week. And it's usually all the morning sessions will be dry sessions. So in the dryland center, like, doing all the acrobatic stuff into foam pits or onto mats, as well as a lot of core exercises. And divers will also have, at least 2, but normally 3 purely strength-based sessions a week to build not only your strength, but your power. So that's strength plus speed.
Now, your event that you went into the Olympics, it had 3 disciplines or 3 levels that you were diving at. So you've got that. The 10-meter platform, which you won the gold. I won't give away. People know you won the gold, so we're not giving away the story. People know that. But 10 meters, I've jumped off 10 meters, and if you don't land properly, and I won't say I dived. I'd like to say I dived, but I'd never had the courage. I always went feet first, and sometimes if you didn't land properly, you felt it. The impact that you're receiving each time with the dives. Talk us through that, because I've been fascinated by it, doing it time and time again. There must have been times when you thought, oops, that didn't land properly. So it's like hitting concrete.
Yeah, it is. Because you do hit the water at 60 kilometers an hour from the 10 meter.
Yeah.
And, so you'll see that every diver has got at least their wrists strapped to try and, I guess, provide a bit of reinforcement, because your wrists are what is taking all of that hit for that, that fraction of a second. And that's the goal, is for only your hands to be taking that hit. And I guess the more either side of vertical that you go, the more of your body is taking more of the hit. And so obviously, when you land flat, your whole body is taking all that force all at once. And so you'll get all this bruising, if you do land flat. And it's happened a couple of times. It does happen. It's one of those things where you just have to get straight back up on the horse, to make sure that you don't then get the ips or the twisties, or whatever your profession's version of that
in your mind
game is.
Yeah. What about you're breaking the water with your hands? I'm talking the 10 meter. With the impact on the head, any concussions, or is there anything like that, the shock that you get from going in the water?
Only if you land sort of flat on your back or your stomach,
right.
Or if you hit your head on the platform or the springboard, which is, it happens.
Yeah. Well, I think we've all seen it on TikTok where a diver's gone bad, and okay. You're training, you're putting in those hours a day, you're working. When did you find out that you made the Olympic team? And talk us through that, because that must be a special moment in anyone's life, I would imagine.
Yeah, I guess I probably wasn't that surprised, to be fair, just because my progress was going really well, my diving was going really well. That the national championships, there are many competitions you have to qualify at. You have to qualify for the next competition for the next. So I guess the first stage of that was the Australian national championships, and I won every event: 1 meter, 3 meter, 3 meter synchro, 10 meter. Like, there was, so I kind of, and then as things progressed, like, it was clear to me that, and then I went to the World Cup and I qualified Australia's spots for Australia to dive in the Olympics.
Yep.
And then I went to the Olympic trials, and I then qualified my spot to fill the spots that I'd already qualified for Australia. So, like I knew that I was going. Yeah. And so when I did actually get announced on the team, it wasn't a surprise, but it was, it was, I don't remember feeling any kind of, I guess it was kind of expected, but, then when this journalist came out to profile me and a couple of my teammates who had also qualified. Yeah, it was just this journalist was just asking me all the, the usual questions, like, how old I am, where I live, who I live with, and because I had spent the last year, I mean, even actually when I retired from diving, I made a promise to myself when I was 18. I made a promise to myself that I was going to be 100% upfront and honest with everyone I met from that point forwards, because it was just horrible.
Living a lie or the deception, and
exactly. And my coach had created such a wonderfully inclusive environment that I had just gotten so used to just to being myself, my authentic self. And so I just said, I live with my boyfriend, and this journalist was so excited by that. She thought it was absolutely wonderful, and she thought that that Australia would really sort of get behind me. But she did actually give me the option of whether I wanted that to go into the story, because I guess.
Well, that was decent of her, because it's it wasn't the intent of. I'm sure she didn't sit down going, "Oh, I'm going to get this as a scoop," but it's nice that she asked you. There's things that you've been quoted about saying about that when you did come out, and one of the things, and I think you've just touched on it, but I'll just read this quote out. I was so scared of it that it would actually tie a rubber band. We've talked about that. So this is the fear that you've had in childhood. And then when you did come out, I was scared about the response, but going into the Olympics, I didn't want the Australian public to think of me one way as straight and then have to come out afterwards feeling like I'd lied to them. So I can understand that, because with the Olympics comes the focus, the attention, and you've gone in there and you'd feel... I won't say hypocrite, because it's personal, and people can talk about their private life if they want or don't want. But I can understand where you felt like it was a weight off your shoulders by actually coming out and saying, "Hey, this is who I am. Accept me or don't accept me." Did it feel like it was liberating for you?
Everybody who was around me knew, but I guess I think I just won the last international event before the Olympic Games, so I knew that I was doing quite well.
Yep.
And that there was a chance that I could do quite well in the Olympics. And so I kind of wanted to save myself a very, very awkward, like, oh, by the way, because, and, the other thing was, there was nothing that could happen to me that I felt like, when you're scared of something because you do the worst case scenario all the time, and queer people do it. It's a universal experience. Before coming out, is the worst case scenario thing, and that I think that stops people coming out a lot of the time. But there was nothing that could happen to me that would be worse than going back into the closet for me. And so, I feel like that's kind of a really good, that's a testament to kind of how I guess soul destroying it is to actually, to not be able to be your authentic self and to be in the closet is, literally nothing in the world could happen to me that would be worse than that. And so, and all of those fears that I had, I didn't care if nobody supported me. It was still more important for me to, to come out to the world before the Olympics, and and none of those fears came to pass. Like, my coming out to the world was front page news of the biggest newspaper in Australia, and I loved absolutely, so extra. It felt kind of appropriate, actually. But none of those fears came to pass. It was 99.99% overwhelmingly positive and supportive from the public, from the media, from everyone in sport. Like, it was such an incredibly wonderful, positive experience.
Isn't that great? And it's almost like an irony. I don't know if irony is the right word for it, but the fact that this is something you feared for so long, and then you've done it, and it's all positive. I think we hold a lot of concerns that perhaps if we were just open about it, it mightn't be as bad as the perception of it.
Yes and no. I think, historically, there was a lot of fear because there was no precedent for me. Any other gay sporting people I knew were kind of Greg Louganis in '88, and but he wasn't out when he dived. He didn't come out until afterwards. So that almost doesn't really count.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
Also there was a lot of controversy around when he did come out, because he also had to come out about his HIV status.
Yep.
There was Ian Roberts, rugby in the '90s,
Yep.
who didn't have the best time. Like it wasn't a super positive experience. How he was treated. And Justin Fashanu, the English footballer,
right.
in the '90s, who the first black player to get £1 million transfer fee, but he came out and was just bullied mercilessly and ultimately ended up taking his life. And so I didn't have any good positive role models to show me that it would be okay. So in some ways, like it's you can kind of be like, isn't it funny that you fear the worst, but I didn't have any evidence to kind of to contradict that. And and you'd think, okay, well, society's progressing, that's wonderful. But just this year, the Olympics Instagram posted an Australian rock climber who qualified for the Paris Games.
Yeah.
And they posted about him kissing his partner and his male partner, and the amount of hate that post has generated is just like more hate than I got in my entire career just in that one post. So you feel like society's progressing, but actually I feel like at the moment, if for the last couple of years, there's been a bit of a swing backwards, like in more conservative values, a bit of an anti-woke kind of sentiment, where it's people are really, really pushing back in quite a horrible way.
That shocks me. I didn't realise, and I wouldn't have anticipated that. I thought it would have just been a blasé thing and it's accepted. But when you talk about woke, I know when extreme views are at one side, then the other views become just as extreme, and they keep they play off each other. So maybe that's part of it. But I thought it had changed. You make a valid point, and also the sportsman that you did mention. I can understand then what you're saying, that, okay, it did work out well, but it could have gone either way for you when you came out. And perhaps even cost you sponsorships or whatever, I suppose. Could
exactly. That's absolutely a fear. Yeah. And, that was a fear at the time. Well, actually, it was certainly a thought that I'd had at the time, but it was something that I ended up saying, you know what, that's just not that important. Yep. But, this boy, Campbell Harrison, he's quite affected by it. He puts on a very brave face, but I've been talking to him privately, because I've reached out and have been supporting him, and
good on you.
He's quite affected by it, which is such a shame. You're about to go into your first Olympics. He didn't. It was something that the Olympics posted, that's gotten all of this huge, just this hatred. And it would take a very, very strong person to not take it personally at all, which it's not about him at all, obviously, but it would take a very strong person to not internalize any of it.
Oh, most definitely. And you're quite right in identifying as a shame, like he's going to something that should be a highlight, and to get negative feedback from that over something that, I really thought we had passed that point. We might take a break now for part one, and then we're going to get into the excitement of going to the Olympic Village. And I got to experience the Olympic Village during Sydney Olympics, and not as an athlete, sadly, but at close personal protection, looking after dignitaries going into the Olympics at the Sydney Olympics. And I got to say, I've been to a lot of places in my time, but going into the Olympic Village just had a buzz of excitement about it. And I'd love to hear from someone that actually experienced it as an athlete, and the excitement of going in there and competing against the best of the best. And so we'll take a short break, and when we come back to part two, we'll go into that and talk about more of your highs and lows and everything else that has happened in Matt's life. So welcome. We'll have you back soon.
Sounds good.
Cheers.